So this is really something. Politico was taken over by a new owner, and there's a scandal afoot. So Haaretz says, German publisher Axel Springer, sounds like a fake name, but it's real. Politico's new owner said support for Israel, for a united Europe, and a free market economy are like a constitution. They apply to every employee of our company. Those who disagree, quote, should not work for Axel Springer. So effectively, Homeboy's making people sign a loyalty pledge to work at Politico. And by the way, Business Insider, he just bought $500 million worth of it, so it might apply there as well. And there's other outlets that he owns. Now, this is quite admission, for one thing. Another fact I should point out is the outlets that he owns in Germany, people literally have to sign an oath, like a loyalty oath to these principles, to these ideas. This is like the antithesis of what the media is supposed to be. You're supposed to be as objective as possible and give people facts and information and educate people. Now, there's always going to be some degree of ideology, of course, because you have to have a framework through which you view the world. And you should be open and honest with that framework. But this is an admission that the framework is imperial. That's what this is. You have to support Israel. You have to support capitalism, free market economy, and you have to support a united Europe. So wait, you can't work at Politico and be in favor of Brexit. Well, Brexit won when it went up for a democratic vote in the UK. So, that's a big opinion to write off. It's a big opinion to write off critics of Israel, because there's a lot of legitimate criticisms of Israel. It's effectively an ethno-state and a theocracy. You can't criticize Israel. You have to, not report on the abuse of Palestinians? That's absurd. That's the biggest story there. So what are you talking about? The support of capitalism thing. Listen, this shows you even social democrats are too extreme and too radical in corporate media. Now, this is just one example, but it's very explicit, so it makes the point. And more broadly speaking, I think this stuff is kind of implied with a lot of other mainstream media outlets. When it comes to identity stuff and cultural stuff and social issues, you can generally go as far left as you want at a lot of the mainstream publications. But when it comes to economic issues and when it comes to foreign policy issues, you cannot step outside of that Overton window. And again, even standard social democrats are too extreme for Politico. So that means a Bernie Sanders type is too extreme for Politico. Bernie Sanders, that's like the left flank of what's allowed. You can't be a supporter of the Norwegian system or the Swedish system and work for Politico. You can't say, hey, I support a hybrid system that has a better mix of capitalism and socialism. No, that's too much. That's too far. When people say, I support free speech and I support a free press and I support people just asking questions and having reasoned debates and discussions, they don't really mean it. They mean it within the confines of what they view as the acceptable realm of thought, an acceptable spectrum of thought. And this is Noam Chomsky's thesis with manufacturing consent. This is exactly what it is. If you set up the parameters of the debate and the discussion and let people have at it from within those parameters, it appears like it's a free and open society and we have an open media with rigorous dialogue. But really, the trick was in the setting up of the parameters in the first place. Because anytime somebody steps outside of those parameters, if you advocate for socialism, if you advocate for any other ideology except capitalism, you've gone too far and you're crazy. Think about how extreme that really is. Because, we've discussed this before on this show, but when you look at capitalism objectively, what is it? Well, it's the opposite of democracy. So we say we believe in democracy when it comes to the government, but when it comes to where you spend most of your time, at your job, at the workplace, where you're an employee, that's a tyrannical structure. That's a rigid hierarchy. That's a dictatorship. Now, I'm not saying that with a value judgment on it. I'm saying it in a descriptive sense. You can think about it whatever you want to think about it, but that's what that is. When you have an owner, and then you have a manager underneath the owner, and then you have the employees underneath them, and whatever the owner says goes, and whatever the manager tells you to do goes, That ain't a democracy. That's not freedom. That's not liberty. That's you work in a mini dictatorship. Now, you might have a benevolent dictator who's over you, but it's still a dictator. And they say you have to abide by that ideological framework to work at Politico. Well, thank you, because now I can write off almost everything Politico says. Thank you for admitting that up front. I will give them credit for this. At least this is the first time they're actually being forthright with their own biases. Because I'm a big fan of telling people what you think up front. So you know what my framework is, you know what my filter is. I've told you guys 1,000 times on this show. There's a number of labels that I'm comfortable applying to myself. It's a complex conversation to really get into all the specifics, but generally speaking, if you were to call me a believer in social democracy, I accept it. If you were to call me a libertarian socialist, I accept it. I have some post-capitalist aspects to my philosophical and ideological worldview, but I also am an empiricist and like when I see things that are proven to work, and I think the Scandinavian model works phenomenally well. The Nordic model works phenomenally well. I'm also happy with the label populist left. If you want to call me a populist leftist, I think that's pretty accurate. I'm also comfortable with the label international moderate or international centrist, because I think I'm sort of, right smack dab in the middle of mainstream opinion when it comes to the industrial world for the most part. So there's a number of labels that apply to me. I will tell you that up front because I'm honest. Now, YouTube sees that and they think, oh, he's biased, But no, everybody has some degree of a framework and a filter that they view the world through. Just some people are honest enough to tell you about it up front and others are not. Well, Politico, even though I think their framework is wrong and terribly wrong at that, at least they're telling us up front, like, hey, here's how we view the world. This is the prism that we view the world through. Well, thank you. Seriously, thank you for that. So now you know. Now, Politico was never great in the first place, but now if you see an even worse turn, you know why. By the way, David Sirota, credit to him, and Andrew Perez from the Daily Poster, they were tweeting, Politico has been running these news things. I forget not newsletters, but it's almost like a Cliff Notes list of the big stories, and it's sponsored by ExxonMobil. And there are other ones that are like, it's on foreign policy, and it's sponsored by some military-industrial complex defense contractor. So they're literally sponsoring news by the people who stand to benefit from a particular perspective on that news. Well, there you have it. Yeah, capitalist framework indeed, and you shouldn't trust a word of what comes out of there, because they are biased in a way that is in favor of the status quo. That's what that is. Whereas my biases, I'm upfront with them, I'm more biased in favor of something that is against the status quo. Now, you can determine if you think things are working all peachy, well, Politico is your place. If you don't, you have a home here. So there you go. It's really something, isn't it? It's really something. But again, at least they're wearing those biases up front, and that allows you to more adequately determine whether or not you trust them in the first place. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.